Welcome everyone, my name is Rigel, and today I want to talk about a bit of very exciting Eurovision news that was announced very recently. So recently, in fact, that as of recording this, it was only announced yesterday. So basically, for me at least, it was around 5 or 6 p.m. The official Eurovision channel basically just put up an unspecified announcement video as a premiere. So naturally a lot of us were wondering what it was about, but well, it came and here it is.
Nous, les amoureux, on voudrait nous séparer, on voudrait nous empêcher.
Autour de moi j'entends rire les poupées de chiffon, celles qui dansent sur mes chansons, poupées de cire. Car de toi je ne pourrais plus vivre, non plus vivre qu'en souvenir. Tu verras que tu te reconnaîtras dans cet amour que j'ai pour toi. La vie est un cadeau de nuit, cadeau repris.
That's right, Luxembourg is returning to the Eurovision Song Contest after 30 years of not appearing at the contest. Now, this came as a surprise to a lot of people. They didn't expect that Luxembourg, after 30 years, would ever return. But actually, we were seeing quite promising signs even last year. In fact, back in December, if you were paying attention to Eurovision news, it was actually being announced that the Luxembourgish government had been working with the national broadcaster to bring Luxembourg back to Eurovision. Not just any Eurovision, but specifically 2024. That is, of course, next year. And the way we knew that this was actually possibly going to lead to something was that the working group was actually spearheaded by none other than the Prime Minister himself, who, by the way, is gay. So like literally he has a husband. So some people joked that people wondered why it took so long for Luxembourg to come back, and actually I remember reading somewhere that the Prime Minister of Luxembourg also actually went to watch Lisbon 2018 in person. So yeah, I think very promising signs were coming from Luxembourg even last year. And in fact, Sietse Bakker, who was the executive director or supervisor of Eurovision 2021, and he's still on the reference group for Eurovision, he said in an interview that actually formal talks actually already began in summer last year. So this has been quite a long time coming. So for me personally, it's not really surprising, but it's still nonetheless very, very exciting news. Now, let's take a look at what we know about Eurovision, with regards to Luxembourg, because, of course, 30 years is a very, very long time, and a lot of us, including myself, of course, weren't even born when Luxembourg withdrew from Eurovision. So let's go back to the very beginning. In fact, Luxembourg was actually one of the first countries to take part in Eurovision at all, alongside, the likes of UK. Ironically, I don't think they were in 1956, but whatever. Alongside also, the countries like France and Germany, for example. Basically, Luxembourg was kind of one of the founding members of Eurovision. And in the early years, they had been very successful, and right now, they're actually tied for third in terms of most Eurovision wins. One thing that I would find quite interesting is that all of their victories were achieved with songs in French, because obviously in the 20th century, French was kind of the prestige language of Europe. And also, obviously, there was a language rule, and Luxembourg's one of Luxembourg's co-official languages is French, so yeah, they naturally sent French songs, and they won 5 times, 2 of those times being consecutive, being 1972 and 1973. But of course, as we now know, after their wins, they decided in 1993 that they were going to withdraw from Eurovision indefinitely because of various reasons. One reason that they'd given in recent years is that it was very hard for small countries to win Eurovision. And I'll be honest, the evidence doesn't really suggest otherwise right now, so I'm not sure what made them suddenly change their mind, but maybe it's the Prime Minister, I don't know. But regardless, one thing that's very interesting is that Luxembourg alongside Morocco are the only two countries to have taken part in Eurovision, but not in the 21st century. Of course, we know now Monaco is a kind of similar story. They're a small country which sings in French and was very successful in the 20th century, but at least we know that Monaco has been back a few times in the 2000s with some very iconic entries, and was not very successful with any of them. But at least Monaco has returned in the 21st century with a few entries. But Luxembourg has not done that. They basically walked away after 1993 and just kind of never looked back until now. Right, so what do we know now about Eurovision 2024? Well, basically, they're going to have, again, RTL Luxembourg, which is the exact same broadcaster who did Eurovision for them back in the 20th century. And the CEO of RTL Luxembourg said this: "We are delighted that Luxembourg is returning to the Eurovision Song Contest, and even more excited that RTL Luxembourg will take on the exhilarating task of selecting the 2024 delegation. As a media company that is dedicated to the people of Luxembourg, we are looking forward to broadcasting the star-studded live shows. Viewers will be able to experience the Eurovision Song Contest in its full glory." Now, again, like I said earlier, this whole idea of getting Luxembourg back to Eurovision was basically spearheaded by the Prime Minister. So I think that certainly played a factor in changing the tone, basically, of RTL, who previously were pretty dismissive and continued to say stuff like small countries can't win. But they have been visibly changed, obviously, by the Prime Minister and his working group. And we're not just seeing them again. We're not just seeing them in some vague points in the near future, but specifically 2024, next year, in whichever country or city is going to be, we will see Luxembourg take part in the semifinals. And speaking of semifinals, let's take a look at some other considerations that we have to think about for a country that hasn't been in Eurovision for 30 years. First off, obviously, how are they going to select their song and their artist? Is it going to be an internal selection? And if it is an internal selection, is it just going to be the delegation asking artists, or are they going to have an open selection, submission period? Are they gonna have a national final like the Dutch National Song Festival or the Belgian Eurosong, for example? And if they do that, how big is the national final going to be? Are they going to allow songs in English? Are they going to allow songs in Luxembourgish? Stuff like that. And yeah, the second point here, songs, languages. Are they going to keep sending French songs, or are they going to start sending songs in English? Because, of course, that's allowed now. And genres as well, because, a lot of countries kind of have their own brand. Georgia likes to do whatever Georgia likes to do. Latvia tends to send more indie type stuff. Sweden obviously sends very polished pop. Finland lately has been tending more towards the rocky side. And of course, the Netherlands are known for their more like somber ballads and such. What kind of brand will Luxembourg take, for example? Are they going to do ballads? Are they going to do pop songs? Are they going to send stuff mostly in English, in French, in even German or Luxembourgish, for example? There's a lot of stuff that's up in the air, and You can see here on the right that I accidentally got a hit tweet with it, 400 something likes. That's absolutely crazy. I don't know how it happened. I was just expressing my thoughts on this, and somehow this got a lot of likes. And I'm not complaining, but yeah, this is kind of random. Another thing that I find very interesting to consider is the televote, because of course in 1993 there was no televote. I think that was only implemented in the early 2000s, maybe 2002 or 2003, something like that. Yeah, point being, back when Luxembourg withdrew, there was no such thing as a televote. And actually, one thing that several Eurofans pointed out immediately after the announcement is that, of all countries, Portugal gets a new voting ally. Why Portugal, you say? Because actually, if you check the stats of the demographics of Luxembourg, you'll find that almost 1/5 of Luxembourgers, or more exactly, I think it's 18% of Luxembourgers, or people living in Luxembourg, 18% of them are actually Portuguese. This came about because of economic downturn in Portugal, while at the same time there was an economic boom in Luxembourg in the 20th century. So kind of as a result of that, there's almost 1/5 of the entire Luxembourgish population are Portuguese. So maybe that's why the Prime Minister of Luxembourg went to watch the Portuguese Eurovision in person. Who knows? But yeah, the point being that there are a lot of Portuguese in Luxembourg, and it's actually quite likely that Luxembourg will be voting in the televote, at least very regularly, for Portugal. And maybe they'll even send artists singing in Portuguese, or maybe half Portuguese or part Portuguese descent singers to Eurovision. It's a very interesting and maybe unexpected dimension to this. But yes, Luxembourg, most likely a Portuguese voting ally. Who'd have thunk it? And speaking of voting, we also have a voting bloc that could happen, we're not sure, and that is the Benelux. Of course, the Benelux stands for Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Now, no one really knows whether this will actually happen. A lot of people have said, for example, that Czechia and Slovakia would vote for each other if Slovakia returned, but we don't really know for sure how proactively Luxembourg would vote for Belgium or Netherlands, for example. It could happen, absolutely, but it could also be like a case of Iceland, where despite being one of the kind of Nordic countries, Iceland doesn't really vote for Nordic countries all that often. We don't really know that for sure, but we do know that in real life, the Benelux bloc is a very friendly bloc, and it's very conceivable that they would vote amongst each other, and Belgium and Netherlands will vote for Luxembourg, and vice versa. So yeah, there's that. But of course, in terms of voting, you're voting to try to qualify, right? That's another thing that wasn't present in 1993. Of course, back then you had the Kwalifikacja za Mill Street, but that wasn't really a semi-final per se. And semifinals were really only introduced, I think, in 2003 or 2004. And so this is something new that Luxembourg has now got to sit through. And it's not even guaranteed that they're going to qualify, because some people think that people are going to vote for Luxembourg in 2024 just for the fact that it's Luxembourg, but that's not guaranteed, and it could be another country where other than the previously mentioned voting allies, they might not have a lot of people voting for them at all. It might end up like a Latvia or Georgia situation, where the country is just not popular enough to get votes. So yeah, qualification is another thing to think about, and when they do qualify, we'll kind of have to see. This is kind of a more long-term thing. We'll have to see how well they do because, of course, like I mentioned earlier, they've won 5 times, but that was way back. In the 20th century. In the 80s and before that. So, times have obviously changed. It's been, 50 years since Luxembourg has won Eurovision. So, obviously the European music industry is very different. So we'll have to see just how things pan out and whether Luxembourg will see success in Eurovision, depending on what types of songs they send. It's all unknown right now, and if we're being honest, this feels more like a debut than a return because, again, it's been 30 years. The country hasn't experienced a lot of the massive changes that we have seen through the past few decades. So, yeah, it almost feels like a country is debuting rather than returning to Eurovision. But nonetheless, it's still very nice to see countries like Luxembourg return to Eurovision. And other things about Luxembourg returning, of course, the fun stuff. First off, pre-parties. This one's kind of up in the air because you can't really predict it based on what the other Benelux countries do. Obviously, Netherlands tend just not to do pre-parties in general. They do Amsterdam, and this year Mia and Dion I think also went to Madrid. They went to Madrid and they also went to Amsterdam, but not much else. And I think last year S10 was just in Amsterdam. We don't know whether Luxembourg is gonna do pre-parties because Gustav was everywhere this year, but last year, Jeremy McKessie was only again at Amsterdam, and we don't know whether Luxembourg would do pre-parties. I think they would do Amsterdam because it's close to them. But other than that, we don't know for sure. But speaking of pre-parties, it's actually kind of funny because during the Polish Eurovision party in Warsaw, we actually saw Anne-Marie David, who won for Luxembourg in 1973, appear and sing her 1973 winning song, Tu te reconnaîtras. But that was very random, and I'm not sure whether this was actually related to RTL's campaign of returning to Eurovision, but still something nonetheless very interesting. And I imagine if RTL were to decide to do pre-parties, because of course flying artists everywhere is kind of expensive, then they might do the Polish Eurovision party as well. Who knows? And the final thing is Junior Eurovision. Now, if I'm being honest, I don't think this is very likely. First off, you need to have the money for it, and second, Belgium doesn't do it. Netherlands is very proactive in Junior Eurovision, obviously, but but Belgium really isn't. They haven't done it in ages, and I imagine Luxembourg probably has a smaller budget than Belgium, so I don't imagine them doing Junior Eurovision. But just imagine if Luxembourg actually goes and returns to Junior Eurovision in the same year they do Adult Eurovision. That would be amazing. And what would also be amazing is if we went to the semifinals in 2024 and we heard the phrase, the next country to qualify for the grand final on Saturday is Luxembourg. That would just be an amazing moment, I think. We haven't heard the phrase Luxembourg in Eurovision for, again, 30 years, so it's just a lot of unknowns, but it's a very exciting time ahead. So what next? Well, first off, actually, if you've read the article about Luxembourg returning, they said that they will have more selection details in July. So I joked on Twitter that I'm gonna mark the entire month of July in my calendar. If you're interested, you can keep an eye out. In July, they'll be announcing more details about their selection. personally, I think that hints towards more of an internal selection, but who knows? But in terms of other countries, I think some people pointed out that this could very much encourage other smaller countries to return to Eurovision, and the main ones being considered are, of course, the microstates that are Andorra and Monaco. And there's actually a little bit of debate over whether Luxembourg is a microstate or not, because basically I think it depends on whether you consider Iceland a microstate. If you do, then, well, Luxembourg's probably also a microstate because they only have double the population of Iceland, because Iceland has around 300,000 people and Luxembourg has around 600,000 people, which means that, yes, like I mentioned earlier, Luxembourg will have a televote because, if Iceland has a televote, why couldn't Luxembourg? And they have their own, area code and stuff like that. So, yeah, Luxembourg's going to have a televote, which is very nice, but yeah, some people still consider it a microstate. And going back to microstates, like everyone agrees that they're microstates. First off, Andorra. On the day of the announcement, we also got reports that Suzanne Georgi, who represented Andorra in 2009, she is still working to try to get Andorra back in Eurovision. Previously, they were saying that they were trying to get the money to return, and now she's saying we've got the money. It's just depending on whether the Andorran government wants to do it, and well, they said that they don't want to. So they said that in the short to medium term, they don't have plans of returning. So Suzanne Georgi, good luck on that. But with Monaco, it's a lot more positive because not only do we have that 2023 budget where they were supposed to put, I think it was 100,000 euros into participating in Eurovision 2023, but then the launch of the new public broadcaster got delayed, and at least to this year. And at the very least, what we do know now is that their new broadcaster is going to be called TV Monaco, and I think I read that it was going to be launching in September. And the article also mentioned that if they can get into the EBU by basically early December, that means they will be able to take part in Eurovision 2024. So that's very exciting, and I hope they do it. I mean, they've got, 100,000 euros for it. Why wouldn't they? So, yeah, very exciting news coming from Monaco as well, I think. And another big name that could return, obviously, is Turkey. Obviously, Turkey hasn't been in the contest for pretty much a decade now because Erdogan thinks Eurovision is too gay. But, yeah, there's still a lot of interest in Eurovision in Turkey, obviously. A lot of fan sites come from Turkey, a lot more than Azerbaijan, really. And, yeah, actually, it all rests on the results of the upcoming elections, because if you've read the news, you know that the next election for the next Turkish elections will take place in I think about 4 or 5 days after the grand final, and the main opposition candidate is this guy named Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. My Turkish is terrible, but yeah, it's this guy. He actually posted a while back some clips of iconic Turkish events, and this included some of Turkey's Eurovision entries, actually. And he actually also said, I think, back in 2021, that it was a big shame that Turkey withdrew from Eurovision. And actually, a lot of bookmakers and polls are actually putting this Kılıçdaroğlu guy as actually quite likely to be able to win over Erdogan, and if he gets to become the next prime minister / president, it's actually very likely that we'll see Turkey in Eurovision 2024 or maybe 2025. So yeah, Turkey is another name that we can keep on our radar. Again, the elections are a few days after the 2023 Eurovision Grand Final, so yeah, just keep an eye out for that, I suppose. And if you're interested in world events, you probably would be following that election anyway. But finally, another group of countries I want to talk about possibly returning are the Balkan countries. Of course, this year we had very few Balkan countries, which incidentally also meant that this is, I think, the first ever year that we have had all Balkan countries qualify for the grand final. If you don't count Greece, that is. We had Serbia, we had Croatia, we had Slovenia, all these Balkan countries that qualified for the final. And obviously from last year, they withdrew Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Bulgaria. And the two main ones I want to talk about are North Macedonia and Montenegro, because these two are the ones I think are the most likely to return. Especially North Macedonia, because they're actually broadcasting this year, even though they're not participating, and they're also doing Junior Eurovision in I think November in Nice. So yeah, North Macedonia I would pretty much pin as like 100% returning next year at this point. Montenegro, I would put as a 50-60%. The Montevideo page, despite them not participating, is still semi-active. Just a few days ago, they were doing some sort of mini game of like predicting Eurovision results. But obviously, it depends on whether they're able to afford to return. But I do think they do have a view of returning. So, if not 2024, maybe 2025. Bulgaria, I think we won't be seeing for a few more years. Because you need to know that actually Intelligent Music Project, who of course represented Bulgaria in 2022, they actually funded the whole participation by themselves. So unless someone's able to do that, it's not very likely that Bulgaria will be able to return because they just don't have the money. Another country that doesn't have the money is Bosnia and Herzegovina. Yeah, it's quite a shame, really. They've done quite well actually relative to other Balkan countries in terms of Eurovision results, but because of funding shortfalls, essentially they just aren't able to return. Fazla said in an interview that he wants to try to get Bosnia back in the contest by 2024, but they're literally owing money to the EBU right now, and there's no like quick and fast solution that would allow them to suddenly be able to pay off all that debt. So I really don't know where he's getting this idea from, where he can solve all these problems magically in 1 year. But yeah, good luck to him, I suppose. And for now, that's the end of this video. Luxembourg is returning in Eurovision 2024, and hopefully we will see several other countries return as well. Thank you for watching. Like this video if you enjoyed my commentary, subscribe so you don't miss more content like this, and I'll see you next time.